What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. During the development of Hearthstone, the Blizzard developers tested out a lot of different things and just cards and hero powers and all sorts of stuff that never made it into the game. And so today we're taking a look back before the release of Hearthstone to find out what Priest could have been. So before there was even a playable version of Hearthstone open to anyone really, the devs of course, they're playtesting the game internally amongst each other, and one thing that we know that they tested very early on in development was a different Priest hero power. So at the time, rather than being a healing effect, the Priest hero power used to have the effect of costing 2 mana, the next minion you play enters the battlefield with +1 health. Now buffing health is definitely a Priest effect. I mean, we see it on cards like Divine Spirit, Power Word Shield, all sorts of stuff. But it's interesting that this was at one point the concept for the Priest hero power, because it definitely would change a lot of things, especially the playstyle for the class in general. Healing based synergies like Northshire Cleric and Akanai Soul Priest would have been much worse than they are now, or perhaps would have been completely different cards if they even existed in development at the time with that version of the Priest hero power. Whereas toughness based synergies like maybe Inner Fire, cards like that would have been slightly stronger, and there likely would have been a lot more cards based around that sort of mechanic as well. We also know that this version of the hero power actually used to stack, which meant that you could hero power a couple times in a row, then play a minion, and then that minion would get multiple additional points of health. Unfortunately, according to Blizzard, they felt that they wanted the Priest to be a healing sort of character, and they were also unhappy with how this hero power would have had to be programmed and just implemented in the UI, and so they chose to develop Priest around Lesser Heal, which is the current hero power instead. Moving on to the card changes, Priest actually had quite a few cards that ended up getting removed from the game, as in the alpha and beta phase, Blizzard experimented a lot with Priest cards in general and just explored the design space quite a bit. Let's take a look at a few of these. So first off, we're looking at Mental Collapse and Greater Heal together, since they kind of share like the same mechanic of maybe counting cards in an opponent's hand. Mental Collapse deals 1 damage to an opponent for each card in their hand, while Greater Heal heals something for 2 points of health for each card in your opponent's hand. And this is actually a pretty interesting mechanic. I mean, the only other card that we've seen that really cared about cards in your opponent's hand is maybe Clockwork Giant and Goblin Sapper. And if you think about the timing between these cards and Clockwork Giant, it's a little bit difficult to tell what Blizzard wanted with this sort of mechanic. I mean, Mental Collapse and Greater Heal were removed really early on in the game. Mental Collapse in Alpha and Greater Heal in the closed beta. But then Clockwork Giant was released in Goblins vs. Gnomes. It's almost as if Blizzard decided that they kinda didn't really like the mechanic, at least in the form that they had designed it in, then maybe decided to experiment it with it again later down the line, and overall it just confirmed their suspicions that this mechanic wasn't exactly the most exciting thing to play with. Going back to the cards themselves though, Greater Heal isn't particularly all that good to be honest, since the decks that you want to heal a lot for against are like the aggressive ones that kind of just dump everything in their hand anyway. And Mental Collapse doesn't really fit all that well into Priest anyway because it's a pretty aggressive card, so we're not really missing a ton in not having them, although maybe OTKing people with the combo of Greater Heal, Cold Light Oracle, Akanai Soul Priest and Mental Collapse and Mind Blast and stuff might have actually been really hilarious and a pretty interesting Priest deck, but still though, it's definitely interesting to see more cards that care about your opponent's hand size, but we definitely wouldn't expect to see more of this mechanic in the near future. 2 more cards that were removed in the alpha stage for Priest are Prayer of Fortitude and Penance. Prayer of Fortitude is a pretty interesting card design, being a 1 mana spell that gives all of your minions +1/+1. And this sort of board-wide buff effect is something that's actually really cool because we don't really see that many effects like it in Hearthstone. I mean, there's some class cards that are pretty similar, like Power of the Wild, Cenarius, maybe Sword of Justice, I guess, but there's really just not a lot of them, and the majority of classes don't even have access to an effect like this in the first place, and there's definitely none for Priest in the game right now. And this is a pretty weird card to have in Priest in general, which of course is a class known for like slowly controlling the board wipes, removal, not necessarily flooding the board with minions and then buffing them. So between this and cards like Mental Collapse and Mind Blast, it's possible Blizzard wanted Priest to have the option, or perhaps was designing Priest to be more of an aggressive class at the time, but then later changed their mind when they realized they wanted a balance of classes inclined to be like aggressive, mid-rangey, controlling, and they kind of just had too many aggressive classes already in the game. Prayer of Fortitude would be a lot more playable as like a paladin or maybe a shaman card, but as a priest card it probably falls a bit short, and it being removed from the game also changed the direction Priest was headed by quite a bit actually. Penance is another card that was removed from the alpha, and it's very similar to the existing card Bash. So for 3 mana, you get to deal 3 damage to something and heal for 3 health. And it's pretty interesting that this card was removed, because the fact that it was removed kind of indicates that Blizzard didn't really want Holy Fire or like Holy Nova effects at various mana costs and with different variations. Maybe because it would allow Priest to play like a very spell heavy control deck, and Blizzard kind of wanted minion combat to be a more central part, or at least some significant part of the deck still. But whatever the reason, Penance was removed in the alpha stage, and we haven't really seen many Holy Fire effects printed since, and we probably won't, because that's a design space that's already been explored pretty significantly. The final Priest card removed in the beta was called Fade, and it was removed for honestly just being a pretty bad card in general. So it gave all of your minions taunt and drew you a card for 2 mana, but giving your minions taunt is only really useful if you have a good board in the first place, so it's kind of like a win more card that doesn't really even help you win more in the first place at all, or really do anything. So again, with the removal of Fade, you see Priest focusing a little bit less on board control and, flooding the board and cards like that, and a lot more on like removal or perhaps buffing a single minion with things like Inner Fire, Power Word Shield, and later on, of course, Velen's Chosen. So these cards being removed and replaced with the Priest cards we know today is definitely a pretty powerful change in the alpha and beta stages to the Priest class in general, but there was also a very important buff in the beta, and that was reducing Northshire Cleric from 2 mana to 1 mana. So Northshire Cleric was Priest's pretty much only early game minion for a very long time, and it allowed them to just hose aggro minions like Leper Gnome and all sorts of stuff, while at the same time also having a really powerful draw engine. So Northshire Clerics put in a lot of work in the history of Priest, and even though the Resurrect lists today might not necessarily play it, Northshire Cleric's been an instant inclusion of 2 copies for pretty much every Priest deck in Hearthstone's history. So if Northshire Cleric had costed 2 mana, not only would the card not have made it into pretty much every Priest deck, but Priest in general might not have just been all that strong as a class. So the most meaningful nerf later on was probably the increase on Mind Control's mana cost from 8 to 10 later on in the beta. Now at the time, this actually had a really big immediate change on the game, since Mind Control became a lot less playable of a card, but it's really interesting to think about whether this change would have really made any difference today. I mean, Blizzard is quoted for saying that they didn't really nerf Mind Control because it was overpowered, they nerfed it because it was just really annoying to play against. That's not to say that the card was bad. I mean, Mind Control is a very high value card, but it does get pushed out of playability by its efficiency and tempo, and after so many cards have been released, Hearthstone is now a much more efficient game, so it's hard to say whether or not an 8 mana Mind Control would even get played today, and it might actually be too slow of a card nowadays, and even if it is playable, there's definitely going to come a time, at least in Wild for sure, when it isn't. So thank you for joining me today and taking a look back at Priest's development to find out what Priest could have been. What would you guys have liked to see the Priest class become? Definitely let us know in the comments below, and looks like that's going to be it for me. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.